Can we talk about depression?
Yeah.
It's ubiquitous in the United States.
It certainly
everywhere,
is.
and especially during the pandemic.
Raise your hand if you've ever been depressed. Raise your hand if you've been diagnosed with major depression.
I have not.
I have not.
No.
So it's a spectrum.
So here's the interesting thing about depression. There is a book out there called Saving Normal. Have you read Saving Normal? I'm going to give it to you.
I've heard about this. Yes. I haven't read it, though.
Saving Normal is a fascinating book that goes into how arbitrary, truly, our definitions of normal and abnormal really are.
Oh.
And how the definition of depression and the criteria in the book we call the DSM, which defines criteria, is influenced by many, many, many things, including Big Pharma. That is absolutely a true story. And Saving Normal was written by one of the gentlemen who helped write the DSM.
Oh.
And he goes into how these definitions came to be. And for anyone who is interested in health or mental health, you will be utterly astonished to learn that this thing we call major depressive disorder is quite arbitrary. There's not a lot of science in our current definition of illness, mental illness. What is normal and what is abnormal is always changing. And we have to be very careful when we talk about disease and labeling people who have been diagnosed with this thing, depression, as mentally ill. Now, I want to be clear that I am not saying that depression is not a mental illness. Of course, it's real. Yes, I am not saying that. But I want to talk about the definitions. First of all, the other issue, and then you can maybe get to our questions. The other issue with depression is that we have all been sold this completely BS idea that depression is a purely biomedical thing. And by that, I mean people who are depressed and go to their doctor get told, it's not your fault. Your brain is just broken, but it's not your fault. It's a flaw in chemistry, not a flaw in character. That, when I lived in Manhattan, when I was getting my master's degree at Columbia, I would look out my window every day, and on this big building in like 12-foot letters, I am not joking, put up by a big pharma company, depression is not a flaw in character. It's just a flaw in chemistry. It's a brilliant message because here's what it does. It takes the onus off of you, like, oh, it's not your fault. But it does place the onus squarely and directly on your dysfunctional, broken brain. Now, that is a big lie. And I want to make sure I'm saying this clearly. People with depression, you are not broken. You are not broken. That is a big lie that you have been sold. Is depression real? Yes. Is it debilitating for many people? Yes. Are there treatments out there that work? 100%. Neurotransmitters are involved in depression. Neurotransmitters are those chemicals that live in your brain and regulate mood and sleep and appetite and all those delightful things. But those are not the only component of depression. You have something to say. I know you do. I can see it in your face.
I'm vibing with this so much. I have a lot of thoughts. Keep going.
Okay. Well, what I want to do, what I was thinking was, I want to hear all of your thoughts. Do you want to read some of the questions we got about depression or no?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And before I do, I want to say one thing. So what you're describing is a reductionism.
Correct.
And it is actually in service of Big Pharma's interests, which
Correct.
are to sell pills.
Correct.
I like the destigmatizing component that it's not your fault, but in reality, nothing is your fault because we are what we are. But that doesn't mean you don't take responsibility for making yourself better. And so the reductionism is a fascinating piece. There's a guy named Ian McGilchrist, who's a psychiatrist, neuroscientist in Great Britain, who's written a book called The Master and His Emissary. And it is about the right brain and the left brain. Not the pop psychology nonsense like, I'm a right-brained kind of creative and I'm a left-brained scientist. It's like, turns out that's not what they do. That's not what they do at all. But what is felt to be the case is that the right brain sees the world in a holistic, connected, relational way. And the left brain actually evolved as the right brain's servant, as its emissary, because what it does is it reduces wholes into little parts and grasps at them and tries to drill down and make sense in a reductionist way. he argues in the book that as human societies progress, they start to fail because we go from a right brain, left brain balance where it's true, the master right brain and his emissary are working in concert to see things holistically and work together, to a left brain dominant society where we reduce everything to its bureaucratic lowest common denominator. And I think that's what we're seeing with depression treatment. And thinking about it, well, it's just a chemical imbalance.
Right.
Yeah. Doesn't help anyone.
Right.
And then you have this huge bureaucracy in medicine that manages the chemical imbalance with a rubber stamp. Here's some Prozac, here's some Paxil, here's whatever, not even looking at the biopsychosocial holistic part of the whole thing.
And we're going to talk about what that means, depression being biopsychosocial, because that was actually the question we got.
That's perfect. So let's start with the first question then. I've been on and off antidepressants for 25 years. Every psychiatrist tells me meds work. Why aren't I better? Harold M. via Twitter.
Will you read the next one also?
And my depression ebbs and flows, and I've been on meds for more than a decade. Help me understand depression with your biopsychosocial magic, please, says Danny.
Right. So just so I want to be clear what this biomedical model of health is. This is what is predominant in medical schools. And the biomedical model of health focuses on just biology. Will you say, as a former med student, because I did not go to med school, what a biomedical model of health looks like a little bit?
A biomedical model of health reduces the sort of 4 quadrants of human existence to 1 quadrant, which is it. So the body, its chemicals, its functions, it's a left brain approach. It's saying, let me not look at a whole, but let me just look at the parts. And by fixing parts, by moving parts, we will fix the whole.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. So what you and I have been talking about for a while now is this idea, which is more like fact, which is that health is always more complex than just that. Human beings are more than just body parts, right? We're more than just chemicals and organs. So there's the bio domain of health. It's this 3-part thing. There's bio, which is our biology. Then there's psych, which is like thoughts and emotions and behaviors and memories and trauma. And then there's social or sociological, which is like the everything else bubble, right? Socioeconomic status and access to care and race and ethnicity and
cultural issues,
family and culture and context and your larger environment,
yes.
Right? So it's all these things always working together in a complex interplay.
But which, by the way, you can
ahead.
reduce in the spirit of reductionism in the biomedical model, you can reduce to I, we, and it's. Okay. So the bio is it's, the we is the social technological stuff, and the I is the internal state.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. What I want everyone to know is that while bio is a very important part of depression, of course, and the bio of depression is like genetics and it's hormones and it's immune functioning and it's like sleep and diet and exercise and it's sex. So females more than males are prone to depression for a million reasons. We can go into the social component of that. And it's also like time of year and the amount of sunlight you get, like winter tends to be a trigger. So all the bio things like neurotransmitters, hormones, those genetics, all real. There is no gene for depression. Dun, 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 dun. There is no gene for depression. There's no depression gene. So I have had patients come to me and say, my mom has depression, so I'm screwed.
Mm-hmm.
If my mom has a gene for depression, I am going to be depressed. Talk about nocebo. Right. So we want to be careful. And by the way, yes, it is shown that depression can run in families, but let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Can you think of other reasons why, if a parent is depressed and a child grows up in that home, why that child might end up feeling depressed other than it was passed down by a gene?
Well, we are social creatures. Children are particularly empathic. They're picking up on the signals of the parents. There may be abuse and other cyclic actions that are triggered by the depression. And I'll say this in the spirit of true integration, there's cultural stuff, social stuff, the way the child then behaves as someone who has some stigma of that, how they're treated socially can feed back into that. And then I think that's all in the setting of maybe there are multiple genetic pieces that collude to put you at slightly higher risk that then is fulfilled by your environment.
Wow. do we give out gold stars on this show?
If so,
Can we get those for
I
next
could get
time?
half of one.
And then we can wear them on our forehead.
That's a good idea.
That was beautiful.
Maybe we could get a little device that just goes cha-ching. Like, 'cause I wanted to do that multiple times when you were talking. I'm like, yes, yes, yes.
Awesome. Great. That was beautifully said. So yes, there are a number of genes it is hypothesized that might contribute. And it is never, ever, ever genetics alone. It is never, ever, ever brain chemistry alone. That's not how it works. Again, depression lives in the middle of this biopsychosocial recipe, like exactly what you just said. So we already did the bio. Let's talk about the psych for a minute. The psychological contributors to depression include the thoughts you have in your head. So when I see people who are depressed, they think things like, this is never going to get better. I am broken. Nobody loves me. My life is meaningless. There's no purpose. Now, if you're thinking thoughts like that, how do you think you're going to feel? I literally just ate the microphone because I got so excited.
Rogan is always asking people to eat. Just get right up on the microphone. Yeah.
I kind of just ingested it.
So what you just described are those cognitive thoughts. Okay, keep going. Cognitive
components of depression feed this cycle of depression because it's always all the things. And guess what? Here's a fact. Thoughts affect physiology. So yes, if you are hooked up to a machine, by the way, this is called biofeedback, which gives you feedback about your biological processes. If you're hooked up to a machine and you're thinking catastrophic, terrifying, or depressing negative thoughts, the machine that is reading biological processes will show you that there are changes in heart rate, changes in body temperature, changes in muscle tension and blood flow, like and even blood oxygen. The things that change when you think a thought are physiological. So I just want to prove to everyone that depression is biopsychosocial. So we have thoughts. Thing two in the psych bubble are emotions. So if you are feeling stressed or overwhelmed or anxious, or having lots of sad feelings, or you're feeling very angry, emotions are also going to feed into the depressive cycle. As everyone knows, when you're really anxious and really stressed out, it's hard to be in a good mood. So emotions are always perpetuating the cycle also. We have self-esteem in the psych bubble too. If you imagine, like if you're struggling with low self-esteem, that can contribute to a depression recipe.
Oh man. This is like a 3-hour show in itself. It's so good. Okay. Just a couple things before you go on. So thoughts contributing to depression, that's easy to wrap your head around because you can say, okay, these catastrophizing, these low identity issues around self-esteem. Absolutely. Because that's a story. It's another thought complex we tell about ourselves. I'm worthless. Yeah. And these are distortions too. Yeah. Because I did this, I'm forever this. Right. All these kind of ways of seeing. What's interesting is the emotion piece. So this is where I'm gonna put the blame squarely again on thought. I think thinking, it's a Zen saying, thinking is the disease of the human mind, and this is why. Raw emotion can come up, but what it does is it triggers a thought cascade, a story cascade, an identity cascade, a self-esteem cascade. And that feeds back and actually reinforces the emotion through resistance. It's like, no, I shouldn't be feeling this. This anger is bad. I'm a bad person. Then the stories, and then the depression is worse. So so anyway, sorry, not to interrupt, but that's something that just came to me, that actually accepting raw emotion as it is and letting it be is a very hard thing for humans to do because we tell stories about it. Yeah.
Agree. And I thought, that was a very helpful connection, because I think what you and I really want to do is just connect all the things. We have this false divide between brain and body, but actually the truth of it is that all the things are connected all the time.
Yes. Body, mind, environment, it's all one thing.
Correct. Yeah. Right. So we've got our bio bubble, we've got our psych bubble. And just to say, also in the psych bubble, this biopsychosocial model of depression is behavior. Coping behavior. So how you act when you have depression is going to affect the cycle of depression. So what I mean by that is, when we are depressed, sometimes we naturally and normally isolate, stop moving, stop going outside, stop exercising, stop seeing friends. We hole up and become hermits. We sleep all day. And guess what? That kind of coping, you bet your ass, is going to make you feel more depressed because now you have no life. You're not seeing your friends. You're not going out. Sunlight, by the way, we are diurnal animals. Sunlight is critically important for serotonin, which is the neurochemical that crashes in depression. We need to be moving our bodies because exercise stimulates this neurotransmitter called serotonin that is implicated in depression. And in fact, the medications that we dispense for depression raise levels of serotonin. So coping behaviors, the behaviors we choose to engage in can also either tank our serotonin or raise our serotonin. So even though depression is fighting you and telling you to stay home and stay on your couch and not see anyone, the most critical part of treatment, in my very humble opinion, is fighting it, getting off your couch, making plans, standing outside in the sun, making sure you're connected with your community, finding ways to move your body. So coping also changes depression, and that lives in this psych bubble.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I'll even add, and I don't know how valid this is, but it seems to be valid. There's a kind of self-soothing that we've learned as young kids that it used to be like you reach out with certain actions and behaviors to your parents to get soothed.
Yeah.
Like, I'm suffering. Let me show you how I'm suffering.
Yeah.
And the parent soothes you, and then you calm down. But as we get older, we internalize some of those processes. So in our mind, we start to go, God, I'm suffering so much. I'm so sad. I can't get out of bed. I won't get out of bed. And there's a kind of an internal self-soothing algorithm where we think, okay, this is going to make us feel better by really just wallowing in this.
Yeah.
So you don't get out of bed, you don't move. By moving, by getting out of bed, it's almost like admitting, oh, maybe the suffering isn't as bad.
Interesting.
Maybe I won't get soothed in this way. And I wonder if there's a conditioning there that sometimes it's good to make explicit. I don't know. It's just something that kind of comes to me sometimes.
So I think that's actually really true. And it does feel like soothing, except that it's a trap.
It's a trap.
Right.
That's the thing.
It's a trap.
So the point is it's a trap. It's quicksand. It's something we learned as kids, but it doesn't work when it's internal.
Right.
Yeah.
And also that kind of self-soothing is great and fine. Like, nurture yourself, take time to rest and eat good food, and then break the cycle.
That's right.
Like,
it's a
that
different
is
type
critical.
of self-soothing.
It's very critical to break. And I want to get to part 3 because, otherwise we will do 7 hours on the biopsychosocial, which would be fascinating.
Which is fine.
But so then there's the psychosocial bubble, or the social bubble of depression. And that really is everything else. So socioeconomic status, and we can talk about what happened during COVID, where people lost jobs and lost homes, and there was food insecurity, and what that does to your mood. And social isolation. Human beings are social animals. In the presence of other people, our brains produce chemicals that make us feel good. Serotonin. I keep mentioning serotonin because that's an antidepressant. So in the presence of other people, your brain produces serotonin. It also produces dopamine, which is this reward chemical that makes you feel good. It also produces oxytocin, which makes you feel connected to other people, makes you feel warm and fuzzy.
I produce man milk when I release oxytocin.
And some Zubin's breasts produce man milk, which is very impressive. Your brain also produces endorphins when you're with other people, which is a natural painkiller and an endogenous painkiller. So in the presence of others, your brain literally makes you feel good to encourage you to engage in social behavior. Guess what happens when you're isolated? Like the last 2 years.
All of it sucked away.
All the chemicals crash and you feel worse. So if you have depression and you're socially isolated, COVID has probably been real bad for you, because we've also lost our normal coping strategies and our support systems. Like, for some people it's church, and for some people it's Thursday night, board games and whatever it is.
Perverted Scrabble.
Maybe it's perverted Scrabble at Ben's house where he's making you homemade ice cream. And I really miss those evenings, I'll just say. But in this social bubble, there's also parents and family dysfunction, and a lot of stuff that happened during COVID too was an increase in abuse and domestic violence, and relationships are toxic, as we all know. So there's a lot of things that live in this social bubble. Like, as you know, your relationships affect your mood. There's also, we're not talking about grief and loss and death. Like, I have a dear family member who lost her daughter to a terrible accident in a hospital, and she was diagnosed with depression. By the way, that's grief and mourning and loss. And they put her on SSRIs, which are a medication for depression. And surprising to no one, they didn't make her feel better, because it's not that her brain is broken. It's not that it's a flaw in chemistry. It's that when you lose a child, it is a terrible, terrible trauma. And there's a lot of ways of treating that. And by the way, I want to make clear, I am not anti-medication. I have heard from many people that antidepressants have been very helpful for them. But what I am pro and what I want to promote is that it's never just one thing. It's never just the bio. If you really want to treat depression, you have to go after the whole biopsychosocial recipe. You want to look at the bio. Yes, of course you do. And you want to look at the psyche. You want to look at the thoughts and the memories and the other emotions besides sadness that are happening for you and your coping behaviors, what you're doing and whether or not it's working. And you want to look in the social bubble. What's going on in my environment that is perpetuating my depression? Do I have toxic relationships? Is there abuse? Is there poverty? Is there racism? What is happening in my larger context that might be messing with my mood, and what can I do about it? So I hope that makes sense, that the actual real treatment for depression, the actual real treatment is not and never will be just a pill. That is not the treatment for depression. It is a biopsychosocial illness that requires a biopsychosocial treatment. And that is true 100% of the time. And I actually recently got into a fight with a physician at Stanford who has a website that I think is horrible. And if you search for it, it's like this Stanford depression definition. And it says some cases of depression are almost entirely genetic, and some cases of depression are not at all genetic. And anyone who understands science will tell you that it is always biopsychosocial.
All the things.
Oh, literally always. But that just tells me this gentleman was trained in the biomedical model, and no one ever told him that the psych and the social are just as important. Like, you're telling me that a child who grew up in an impoverished, abusive household where they were beaten every day and they developed depression, it just might be that 95% of them, it was like a genetic thing. Just maybe it was genetic. Like, no, maybe there was a genetic predisposition, and the environment is the thing. Like, it's always genes plus environment. That's what humans are.
Exactly right. How many gold stars can I throw at you for that?
It just
whole
makes
thing?
me so mad.
And so the other thing is that you just think about, like, you know, somebody who survives the Holocaust and they're resilient in a way that some of that is genetic.
Yes.
Sure. Some of those kids who survive those very traumatic upbringings grow up to be very resilient. Well, okay, so some of that's genetic. Some of that is they had some luck. Some of that they had help. Some of that is what they had for breakfast. It's a very complex thing.
Resilience is biopsychosocial too.
Yep,
exactly.
Sure is.
That's right.
And that it relieves some of the shame issues for people because they understand, no, it's actually quite complicated. It's not that simple, but that doesn't absolve me in whatever agency I have of taking some degree of control, or at least perception of control, to do some things.
That's exactly right.
And that's what, I mean, again, I'm going to keep pimping this thing. If that's what you do in the book, it's a workbook. You're supposed to go and actually go in and fill in these things, look at your thoughts, journal these things out, you know? I read Feeling Good, the book about CBT.
Burns.
Really great.
Yeah. Burns started this CBT movement. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a gold star treatment for depression. Cognitive behavioral therapy.
It really is great. Now, what I'll say is this: it's not the only thing, right?
Correct.
So again, it's a piece.
There's no panacea.
There isn't. If you read the book, you might think, oh, this is it. But the truth is, it's one piece, and it may not be the perfect fit for everybody.
Correct.
You require, listen to that. They're doing some kind of
drilling,
remodeling up there.
Right.
I feel like I'm at the dentist.
That's the sound it triggered for me too.
Do you think Battle Cat turned into his wussy cat whenever he goes to the dentist?
Maybe. Do you know we got some questions actually about dentists and dental anxiety?
Did we?
Yeah. I don't think
we'll save them for another time.
I think we're talking sufficiently loud that it won't really be heard.
It wouldn't.
Yeah,
I think it's just actually a nice touch.
Yeah,
it adds a certain
the dental
ambiance.
drill.
Yeah. It's giving me like, it's funny. So I got to tell you a quick story, a little side.
Okay.
Because I've been meditating a lot. Which is probably a little bit of seeking behavior, meaning it's a little bit of like, oh, I can control this process of spiritual awakening. Well, you can't. It really just kind of happens. You can put yourself in the way of it. So I put myself in the way of it by meditating, sometimes 4 hours a day. Like I'll get up really early, go to bed really late, and do it. Well, so I was in that state of concentration. I went to the dentist. The dentist was like, oh, you have these sort of receded gums. I'm really going to try to clean under them. Quite a bit. So you might feel a little discomfort. It was like somebody was drilling into my brain is what it felt like. So I said, okay, I can either capitulate here. Like, it's okay. And then I actually thought about you. I was like, biopsychosocial. I thought about meditation. I thought about, this is pain. Pain is a signal for my brain saying, hey, wee something's
Danger.
up. Don't know, I knew intellectually she's not hurting me.
Not dangerous.
Not damaging me. She's the dentist, for gosh sake. So I said, okay, let me witness this pain as that. And I dove into it. Like I became this vibrating sensation. It no longer was pain. It no longer had a story. It was this vibrating sensation of energy. And when I was done, it was funny. I think I may have had actually a tear come down involuntarily, but I was not suffering. And I told her, she goes, so how was that? And I said, oh, there was a lot of pain, but it was okay. That's all I could say.
Wow.
and that's how it felt.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
But what's funny now, if we talk about it and you hear these guys drilling, there's an anticipatory component. It's like, oh, I'm going to have to go back and she's probably going to do that again. Like, will I be able to drop into that state?
Yeah.
And then the mind starts to tell stories.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But that's what an amazing story you just told in my mind about like the cognitive component of pain and the amount of control we have over it. And as you were talking also about depression, it just reminded me that one of the things we really want to do is give people their power back and help them remember that they have some power over pain and they have power over depression. And the way you hack pain and the way you hack depression is by going after the different components of this biopsychosocial recipe. So if you've done the bio already, and most people have, and you're still experiencing pain or you're still experiencing depression, the good news is there's this whole bio domain and there's this whole psychosocial domain that you can go after to exact some control over your pain recipe or over your depression recipe and change the recipe and change your experience. And that's what I like so much about it is that it gives a lot of hope and power back to people who are living with all the things.
Oh, so you're giving people many more options.
That's exactly right.
Which gives them agency and empowerment.
Exactly. Like, what can I change in my behavior? What can I change in my environment? What can I change in my thoughts?
Absolutely.
What can I do to change my emotions?
If I was sitting in that dentist chair and I didn't have the tools that I'd had by luck, by serendipity, right? That I would have just been like, I quit. And then she would have had to do the whole thing with the deep cleaning and the numbing and all that. I didn't have to do all that.
Right.
But it was and this is not an isolated experience that just some people have. I think anybody can do this. But
anybody can do it.
They need to be empowered and taught how to do it.
Tools.
Right.